Hi, Lise. You've just come back from a recent trip to Mongolia. Would you like to tell us something about Mongolia and how it relates to Scotland and differences or similarities? That would be really interesting.
So I just came back from 4 months during the summer where I was working on a project out there called A Vocal Journey in Mongolia. So the idea behind that was for me as a holistic vocal practitioner based in Scotland to go out there to put myself in a kind of learning situation to interact with different people from different perspectives, all with a background and speciality in Mongolian throat singing. So I wanted to learn a completely different way of vocalizing and making sound to inform my own practice as a musician. And I was also interested in examining whether there would be particular therapeutic benefits to using the voice in this kind of way. So um, I spent a really amazing time out there meeting different people and was very fortunate to find five different teachers who all had a lot to share. Um, in terms of similarities, landscape uh, is vast out there, so sometimes you find yourself missing a kind of a V-shaped valley. Or um, when I went out there initially in June, I was hit with the heat of the city, and it's really funny how you find yourself praying for a dreich wet West Coast day when you've not experienced that in a while. So climate quite different, but similarly four seasons one day, preparing for all weathers. And the distances to travel, yeah, a huge place and huge vistas. And definitely by the end of 4 months, I was finding myself thinking of the sea, because in Scotland you're never too far away from the coast.
How vast is Mongolia?
So end to end, um, almost 2,000 miles. So the capital city, Ulaanbaatar, is there's a lot of travel west from there, and after a certain point, um, the road kind of pales into insignificance. So um, it's definitely a place for adventure and for being prepared for all kinds of travel, and yeah, the adventure of who you meet along the way and who you interact with is very integral to their nomadic way of life, and how they communicate with each other. And because you never know, your neighbor might be pulling your car out of the mud if you get stuck. So everybody is kind of has a different philosophy to movement, and getting up and going. It's yeah, because it's travel there is not always easy.
Were the Mongolian people that you met familiar with Scotland? Did Scotland mean anything to them?
So when I travel these days, I like to take the kilt with me, uh, and I tend to wear it on the plane or the train if I'm leaving or entering the country. Just that's like the material passport. It gives you some identification, and it's kind of, for me, it's something that I wear with pride. So when I arrived there, I had the kilt on, and there were a few people that knew what it meant or knew something about tartan and a connection to Scotland. There were many people that didn't. I never know whether to be surprised by that or not, because even within Scottish historical information, there's a lot of controversy on like the origin, and I don't know so much about those details myself, but yeah, it was a talking point at least. It was something that identified you, and then from there you could explain about it being national dress, and that's always a point of interest with Mongolian people as well, because their traditional dale is the kind of the long jacket overcoat, and they have different types that they wear depending on the season and the climate, and they absolutely love to wear that, and it's beautiful silk or different materials, and it's something that is still worn very much today, not just for weddings and celebrations, but even in the city, which is very quickly modernising and growing and has a strong Western influence. There are still people that will be wearing the traditional dress. So
Scotland's full of music and revival music as well. Is that what's happening in Mongolia? Are they very proud of their music, and how wide is it practiced and so on?
yeah, I would say from what I know about Mongolia opening up post Soviet era, and suddenly their elevation on into the kind of global platform, um, there was certainly huge interest there, for musicians, researchers, kind of cultural exchanges, and then obviously business opportunities as well with the global market. So I think it the traditional music there definitely kind of became, yeah, pushed to the worldwide stage. And in terms of um, their tradition being alive, very very much so, and that was part of the reason that I wanted to go there and was interested, um, because I have experienced the Scottish folk scene in various forms, facies, céilís, um, community organised festivals and events, uh, being in and out of people's houses and hearing storytelling and hearing songs. Uh, but this was a point of interest, in terms of sharing cultural exchange with Mongolian people, because I was going out there to inquire and learn about what ways are you using the voice, and how is this important and integral to your daily practice, and what's meaningful about it, and really wanted to understand a deeper sociology of the way that they're making music out there, because it's the oral tradition is very rich, um, as it is in Scotland too. But I did find, um, in these exchanges where you're kind of telling people about your context and your place, um, I was having to explain, okay, well, we have been affected by cultural suppression and social suppression, and this has had an impact on our oral history, our traditional music, and crucially our language, which is of course related to that. So um, that gave me a sort of uh, strong feeling about, I was out there in a way, learning about a new culture and a different culture, but I was actually rebuilding a connection with my own, reflecting on things that are kind of a bit more difficult to find here, or there's maybe few story holders and song keepers left that are kind of maintaining, transmitting, and sharing, um, our culture.
Did you meet many practitioners of throat singing itself?
So there's definitely many schools of thought within that tradition, from all different levels, and I mean, somebody's granny to a cultural organisation that are particularly focused and interested on the throat singing, and then you know government organisations, media organisations. Everyone has a slightly different slant on it, but there are definitely pockets, geographical areas where there seems to be a high density or proportion of people in the local community that are practicing it. Maybe that area is particularly well preserved tradition, or it's come to be associated with one kind of singing that's been popularized, and then there's been a kind of a growth and expansion of interest, and that's kind of led to there being lots of people in one area that are all very accomplished in a particular style. But yeah, I think across different levels of proficiency and also I don't want to say expertise, but certainly there's like a practicing school that are doing it very much in family settings and very low key, informal, relaxed. And then there's also people that are in conservatoires that are striving and pushing for a deeper exploration, and perhaps a more of a Western influence there. So there are many different practitioners with many different perspectives. So I was fortunate to meet several different people, and I felt that gave me a broader perspective and a more holistic perspective.
It's a very small population. I think it's around about 3 million spread across 2,000 miles, roughly by 500 miles deep. Did you get out into the very rural areas and have the privilege, I suppose, of staying with small family units in very ancient, primitive situations?
Yes. So the capital city was a base for me, and when I arrived, I had this idea that I would kind of stay there very briefly and then go out to the countryside and have my rucksack, and that would be me, which was maybe a little naive without appreciating the necessity and the existing relationship that people living in the countryside have to the city. That's the main cultural hub, the main base. People have extended family and relatives there. People need supplies from there. So certainly in the far reaches close to the border, there are definitely people who have not been to the capital city, and there are people that do not want to go, because they're living a very traditional pastoral lifestyle, and as a city fast growing, that bears no relevance to them in terms of the life that they are living. But I did find myself moving between countryside and city just as the Mongolians do. So their movement and travel is vast, and they go all these distances that would seem crazy to us, because we're living in such a small place. But yeah, I did travel west, and I wished to go even further west than I did. I think that will be for another time, but I was fortunate to be able to stay with different families in different places, and kind of begin to get a feel and an insight for their very rooted way of living with the land and being connected to the land, and that made me think fondly of what I have read of Scotland, and also with a little bit of sadness as well, because I'm aware that a kind of crofting way of life and a more nomadic way of life here is something that almost does not exist anymore. So that was something that really struck me, and I kind of wanted to bring that perspective and energy back home with me, because many times I would be asked, oh, how do you do things in Scotland in relation to, food or travel or cultural practice or, music. And I found myself again and again having to say, well, we did do this, or I know that we used to do that, but we've not done it in my lifetime. Or trying to explain that the language that is native to us has been suppressed, and that's had an effect on music and storytelling and sharing. And that was something I found difficult to explain, not only because my language skills were quite basic, but it seemed to resonate with those I shared it with. They kind of recognized, yeah, okay, I understand where you're coming from, because I guess as a very fast growing place in the world, and with its location, there's also the threat of their oral tradition kind of being diminished or losing some of its strength.
I hear that the Mongolians are very hospitable and they're great meat eaters. Did you experience that with the families away out in the western side of Mongolia near the Russian and Kazakhstan frontier?
I did, yeah. Very hospitable. Yeah, I think, again, it's the relationship to landscape and environment is the backbone of that. If you have to travel for hundreds of miles between 2 points on any given day, then you need a pit stop. You need somewhere, you might need some help, you might need your vehicle pulled out of the mud, you might be delivering messages from the city. The travel and the movement is as much about getting from A to B as what you experience on your journey and who you meet and, oh, can I help you out kind of thing. And in terms of the home space and the environment, to share food is such a huge part of that. And yeah, milk tea, and of course,
What's the main diet?
Of course, the meat as well. Yeah, so mutton and yeah, mutton, lamb, mutton, very very sheep.
And they eat horse too, don't they?
Yes, they do, and I did try that when I was out there. So yeah, I did not go hungry, but it was, everything is sustainably sourced and nothing is wasted, and they have huge pride in their food culture, because it's ancient, and the methods they use to preserve and use everything are really, yeah, very old.
Liz, we're nearing the end. Do you feel that you were able to share a lot of your Scottish culture with your Mongolian friends that you made there?
Yes and no. I would say I was staying in a guest house in the city, and I used that as a base every time I was in the city. And there were many travellers from all over the world visiting, so you're meeting people all the time, and part of that sharing is about, you know, where are you from. So um, European travellers and people from a more familiar or Western context, a lot of the cultural sharing came down to discussions about stereotype. Um, so that was kind of like a light-hearted contrast to the sharing of culture between Scotland and Asia, which was much more deeply inquisitive about, you know, oh, we do this with our food, or we do this with our ritual and our practice and our tradition. What do you do? And I think largely in terms of the practical way of life and the livestock and living close to the land, that's all stuff that is really familiar to me in terms of a known kind of a historical understanding of Scotland, and less so a lived experience because of the way that our culture is moving, and I suppose a lack of education about history, and perhaps a lack of interest from younger people about that way of life. So I think I was trying to live vicariously through the Mongolian experiences and the people I met, and actually allow myself to connect with my strand of like a Celtic context, and experience a way of living that has almost been completely destroyed here. So yeah.
Have you managed to keep in touch, now you've been back for 5 or 6 weeks now, with your Mongolian teachers, for instance?
I have been in touch intermittently through different platforms. Mongolians are amazingly well connected with Facebook. Apparently, they have the most Facebook users in terms of their ratio to population. So they're pretty well connected people, and I've received sort of video chats and messages from one teacher saying, I hope you're practicing every day. So yeah, I'm going to try the postal service out and see how reliable that is. So